Hello, in this video we'll be looking at Blazor forms with MudBlazor. Specific components being used, we'll try to use some input fields. This will be part of a series. The previous video was introducing MudBlazor in general, building a little dashboard with all kinds of components to display some data, essentially to display a list of users. In this case, we'll build a form. It will be a step-by-step guide. We'll be building a form which will allow us to register a user, and then we'll be able to see it displayed. So let's get started building, and you don't have to watch the previous video if you don't want to. It's more about the setup, but also it's useful to learn about all the tables, which we will kind of be using here, but not that much. The focus is on the MudBlazor forms themselves. Before we get started with the actual form, we do need to set up some kind of a model to be used in a form. Just like in your regular HTML forms with Blazor, you do need to set up a form with properties, validation. So let's do a little class, a model class. We don't really need to do anything fancy. In the project itself, we will just do a little folder for models. As this is part of a series, we will build more models along the way, and you will see a sort of more complicated example later in the upcoming videos. But for now, we will just have one form. We will try to register a user. For that, again, just a class. And if you're not familiar with Blazor forms, this is a good way to learn. Although if you want to get more into detail, for that, you should watch our recommended MudBlazor course or read the recommended book on Blazor in general. You will learn about custom validation, get a sort of deeper dive into the whole thing of forms and validation and how you can customize it completely. In this case, we will, however, use just sort of generic attributes, which is good enough for most registration forms out there in the world. So let's do register user model like that. And then we'll add a few properties. So we'll probably need first name, last name. Of course, you could just have email and password for that sort of stuff, but we are displaying first name and last name, so we kind of, just for display purposes, we do need this arrangement, and we do need required, and we do need email address. So let's remove that. Now let's do public string. That's not going to be a username, that's going to be first name. And just to kind of zoom in a bit, perhaps, let's do 150, perhaps even more. We can probably do 200, 150 will be fine, just so you can see a bit better. Now, with the required, we can certainly use that here, but we do need to add a using, specifically for any MudBlazor form or any Blazor form actually. What you will be using is component model data annotations. So it is all suggested and provided, and again, reference for this is easy, relatively easy to find. The more difficult parts of the validation process, at least, would be when you get to sort of more complicated things like custom validation. You want to have some, perhaps even API call during validation, which makes it a lot more difficult then. This, however, is quite straightforward. So let's follow the suggestion from Visual Studio, and of course, on the newer versions of Visual Studio, if you're not too used to it, these suggestions can be quite annoying, but once you get used to them, they also become quite useful. You just kind of need to get familiar with them and get used to them, essentially. And it's certainly not a feature you should be turning off, because it's a bit annoying at first. So let's do an error message. As you can see, everything is suggested, so very quick. This will be, and I believe like that should be good enough. Now, one thing to mention about the password here, the min length is 6. That's sort of okay, but really you should add, in the real world at least, you should add probably at least 8 characters, and more importantly than characters, you should add complexity, and the complexity should include, or would rather say must include, at least one symbol and one number, and uppercases don't matter that much, but everything essentially. So lower, uppercase, characters, symbols and numbers and digits, all those things need to be included. Now what we will also do, because this is a sort of UI form model, we will do confirm password, because we need to confirm the password, right? So you write the password and you need to repeat it. This we can do in a sort of more easier way. So this part is required. So let's say password validation is required, if that's the right word. Probably not really. But we don't really need to check the length. We could. Essentially, we are checking that it is the same as this password, right? If you've developed anything, you've probably done one of these forms, or at least seen the code for them quite a few times. But here in .NET World, there is a very useful validation attribute called compare. So you can easily compare password to password. So you match the property here and you match the property here. It has to match. If it doesn't match, then you get this error, passwords do not match. The validation doesn't pass, the form doesn't submit, all good and great. We also can add a few more things just to make it interesting, and also just to make more interesting in the later videos. So let's do accept terms. Let's do accept two terms, maybe a bit better, and another one, just a string, a simple string, which is gonna be roll, and we don't need any validation for all. But again, as I mentioned, if you go and look at the course that we recommend and get into sort of deeper validation, this is where custom validation might come in. So you might see if certain emails, certain email domains are allowed a certain role if they want to register. Maybe it's an in-house user and they are allowed to register with that domain as a certain role, or be registered if it's not actual user registering themselves. And of course, for the Boolean, for a little checkbox here, accept the terms, we of course must have a required validation, because you want users to read your privacy policies and cookie policies and all those things before they actually get into your website and start using it. Has been a standard for a long time. Now we do have all those validations ready. We do have a very nice model to work with, and now it's time to get started and jump into a real page, create a real page, and do some forms and some validation with them. Now we have this empty register.razor page. Let's zoom in a bit more, just so it's easier to see. And we need to fill it up. So the page, let's call it, let's say register. Of course, it is a page, so we need a directive where to land for the route. We will add it later to an existing navigation. And again, this is the same example as from the first video in the series. And if you want to learn more about the setup and just sort of basic components and tables and things, take a look at that video. Also, the code is available on Patreon. This version of it will be available as well as the previous one. So you can compare or take the other one and follow along as well. You can do that. And download the code and take a look at it, or maybe even improve a bit. Also on the page, we can do a little page title and some other things, but let's skip that for now. What we need, if we go quickly to the layout, because everything is based on this mud main and mud container layout. So it's not Bootstrap, it's not something custom. So we kind of need to adjust just some place to put the form in. We can't just drop the form in because it's not gonna look very good. So let's do another mud container. That should work well enough. We'll put some data in there and just a few things. We can use the suggestion, let's delete this and let's simply, so we don't overcrowd the page, essentially, let's do register, and that should be good enough. So now everything will happen in this mud container, but you'll notice I'm not adding another container inside the container for the form or for the mud text. it would simply be a block arrangement in this container. So first will be the text, and then we'll have the actual mud form. Let's create the mud form, and then let's do a bit of a layout change. Because we are using the other way as max width, we can create max width, and we'll play around with it a bit later, just so we can have some arrangement. Now, for a form, we probably want to keep it centered or somewhere like that, but realistically, a form like that shouldn't be large or shouldn't be full screen and all those things. So what we can do is probably do just small. And we'll also add a little class here just to make some spacings. And this is, again, you'll notice we're not exactly using Bootstrap, but these are very similar to Bootstrap if you ever used it. These are MudBlazor classes, but they are sort of almost essentially the same. And you'll see once we set up the grid in the form. Now, we will not use a form, as you can see. We will use a mud form. So it's a bit different, but essentially it's kind of the same, and you get different sort of kinds of control. In the form, you can have whatever you want, as you usually do in forms. It doesn't just have to. It doesn't have to be like text field, MudTextField in this case. You can have a little grid arrangement inside it as well. So let's do MudGrid, just so we don't sort of have everything in line and sort of boring. We'll kind of arrange it in a different way. Now, the thing about this point, you can create your inputs and then do the logic. The problem is we will need to do the bindings as usual in Blazor. So at the very least, what we should do at this point, we should set up the model so we can have the bindings, and then we can do all the other stuff. So let's do a little private mud form. I'll explain why. And then also the actual model. So let's see, register user model. And the problem now is we need to have a little using, because the model is not directly in the project. It is in... Don't need the MudBlazor, we need MudBlazor example, and that's gonna be models. So in the models, we will find that little model that we created with all the validation ready, register user model. So register user, and we can get rid of this. We are working in modern .NET C#. We can have construction done like that, and by default, every time we launch this page, it will have an empty model object, which is very important. You have to have it. You have to have that constructed for the form to actually work properly. Now, we have a basic sort of arrangement of it. We can move on and start creating a few fields. Let's do, say, for example, in the MudGrid, a little mud item. So you can probably see the pattern already. Let's do mud item. It's relatively straightforward. We have a mud grid, and then we have all these mud items. Now, you can look at it if you are familiar with Bootstrap. Imagine if this was div and it was with class row, and then these would be column D something, and that's how they would be arranged. And you can also do like, let's do it inside, let's see, SM6, like that. So it will be on different size of display. Maybe inline, maybe in a column, depending on the size of the display. So you get all those options just like you would get from Bootstrap. The only difference is you're using a mud item instead of a div, and that sort of gives you a bit more as well. Not too much, but then each of these components, or perhaps you would have a custom component as well, it doesn't matter really. You can pass everything that is in a form to a custom component. That becomes a bit more troublesome. We might look at that in the later videos of these series. So let's do MudTextField now. And it's going to be first name. The suggestion is valid, I believe. We have MudTextField, register bind value, register username. Let's take the second suggestion as well. That's going to be good enough. It's going to be just sort of inline first name, last name. Great. So let's look at the actual components. The first one, we have MudTextField. That is your essentially text box input of type text. That's what you're using to do all these inline text arrangements, first name, password, all those different things. So then we bind value. You bind value the same way as you would with regular components, right? Regular inputs, not that much different here. However, there are other kinds of inputs, so you might need to specify the type and then bind text if you want to just bind text and not specify the type. There's sort of different arrangements and we'll get to them. Required true. We'll get to this a bit later. We already have required, but you can put required on the actual component, although that's something to be a bit careful about. Once we load the form, you'll see the errors might sort of conflict and you might get one kind of error on one component on one input, and then on the other it will be different errors. So something to be a bit careful about. And full width is true. There are other options. Say for example, you can do a few sizes and things like that. You can do formats. We'll get to that probably in later videos. It's a bit more complicated. But basic arrangement, MudTextField is an input box, text box. That's all you sort of need to get started. And these should work perfectly fine. So the next one then is the email. You have your first name, last name, email. Great. And we have a suggestion as well. So for email, once again, we will use this arrangement. And notice we're not actually using any sort of different type here. The interesting thing, once we launch the form, you will see is how the errors are being handled. There can be a few conflicts when using MudBlazor form with Mud inputs. It can be a bit conflicting with regards to the actual model annotations. So something to consider, but something we'll get to as well. You can also do something like this. Let's move it to the next line. You can add a helper text. So sort of additional description of what it is. So let's say we'll never share you. Okay, that's good enough, right? We could just add anything really in this case. At this point, we have something sort of valid, something sort of ready to go. What we do need to do also is add a ref like that. That was the MudForm. So we will be able to sort of fully control the form from the code. Now, is it very useful and is it very necessary? That's debatable, especially if you are considering using just regular forms. You can certainly do that. There is no problem with doing that. So you don't necessarily have to use MudForm because you will see there is a bit more complexity and it can be a bit more tricky. But that's something for a bit later. At this point, we can launch the program and see what it looks like, although we do need to add the navigation part to the actual navigation menu, which we have here, nav menu, and I believe it's created into this. The nav menu is here. And again, this is coming from the previous video of the code, but there's really nothing all that new in here. So let's just add a simple nav link. Let's do register. Okay, do we have something more interesting? App registration. Why not? So now let's launch and see what it looks like if we actually get something, because again, it's not fully finished and it can be a bit tricky in that department. Now, as you can see, the form is sort of ready. We don't have any real floating effect and it is a bit messy. Now, you can see the register part here. The reason is on the side like that is because this sort of container for the form is sort of a bit more centered than this part. We can correct that in a few ways. We can center the text. We can certainly try that. But also notice in this plain background, these plain inputs don't exactly work. Now, in MudBlazor, there are three types of input sort of arrangements in terms of a style, in terms of a default style at least. So one of them is this, the other will be filled, the other will be different. So let's get back into the code and let's see how you can actually change them. In order to change how your input looks, the default styling at least, you can of course use style and try and override it. The better idea, if you base your whole project on MudBlazor, is to add different themes, different default colors and different font sizes. That's something we will take a look at in probably the next video of this series. It can be quite tricky customizing, and especially if you want to do deep customization. At that point, you're probably better off just creating your own component for inputs. But there are these variants, variants of a MudTextField, of a button, and as you can see, you can have outlined, and it's not going to be just like that, but variant, and then outlined, text, and filled. What we are using is text. Filled is probably one of those traditional ones. We won't do the other one, but just so we can see the difference, we can launch and take a look. And here you can see now it's all filled. It's a different style of a button. It looks different. And you can also do an outline. Now, filled or outlined, probably outlined would be the sort of traditional one. These can certainly work as well if you have a sort of a design, but they are a bit different. And as you can see, you probably won't be able to mix and match them because then all the sizing is off and it doesn't work quite as well anymore. So let's just make them all maybe outlined and let's be done with it. Let's do this one and this one. You saw this one is XS. We need to add this part because you saw it's taking a full width, which we don't want. It's not a big enough field really. So we have a last name. We need now the password stuff. The password stuff we can put in one line as well. There's no reason to make a massive field. Let's see, mud item. And then what's going to be password. So as you can see, I mentioned in the beginning of the video, these suggestions can be annoying. However, in this case, they can also be quite useful. One thing to note about the password, let's move it like that a bit so we can see it in one place. We have still MudTextField. The only difference is that we're using input type password, and there are several input types. We can do email and password. One thing we did not do, I believe, let's double check it, we didn't do on the email, input type email, which we can certainly do because it is an email. So let's do email like that. And then this mud item also needs the same arrangement here. So we have 2, 2, 2, a sort of nice little grid, sharing the space properly. On a smaller screen, they will just drop to bottom, so it will go top to bottom very perfectly. Now, password, input type password, everything is still MudTextField. The next one is where it gets a bit more complicated. What we will do is a row selection. Now, row selection, we need a select. But once again, we do need a mud item. And for the select, what we will actually do, we'll try to put it in one single line because it is sort of, it could be at least a larger thing, but we will see the difference, and it will probably work perfectly fine if we put something else alongside it. Having said that, in this case, the next thing will be the little checkbox to agree to terms. So do we want that in one line with this selection? Probably not. Usually that's how the user experience should flow. The statements, all the acceptance, marketing, perhaps consent and things like that should go to the bottom. That's how it's usually done. So let's do this more fancier component. MudSelect item, select, MudSelect. We start from MudSelect and then we'll have MudSelect items. So Are we happy with these items? Yes. Are we happy with the values? As you'll soon see, actually no, because it will cause an error. Now, we don't have any binding, but it will still be a bit troublesome like that. You will see in a moment why. So let's do bind value. Notice how we, in this case, bind a value. Not text, value. Previous were text, is still value. But in this case, it will end up being a bit different. What you can do in MudSelect, you can specify what type you are selecting. So in this case, it's a string, like that. The only problem now is these are not really string. It's kind of weird how it takes the value. It doesn't take directly, even though you have these quotation marks. So you might think doing something like this would help, but no. What you do is you simply wrap it in this little sort of impromptu string variable. You're kind of just creating a variable without a name, an anonymous variable, if you will. It's not really that, but we can call it that. And now we can just copy it like that, paste it like that, and just cannibalize the admin, and we already have a suggestion. So if you are doing text, you will need to wrap it like that. With numbers, it's a bit easier. The other values could be kind of like that as well. And you can use enums and things of that nature. Just remember to kind of sort of properly match the types and make sure you have all the encoding and decoding of the values properly set up on your backends and validations and things of that nature, because it can be quite tricky. So the raw, we don't really have too much of a validation there. We just validate that it's there and required. Also notice on this one, I won't add required. You will see a bit of a difference perhaps. The other ones we have required, but remember, we also have required in the annotation. So you will see kind of the difference of how it works. Now, let's just do the last input. Mud item. See, mud item, like that, like that, like that. We don't need this suggestion. It's not useful. Because we don't need a button, what we need is a MudCheckBox. Like that, accept the terms, I accept the terms, perfect. Almost perfect. Of course, the suggestion wasn't full, but again, for you to write the same code and the same arrangement, it would take quite a bit longer. So let's do like this and close it, and that should be fine, I believe. Oh, we close it like that. No, we need to close it properly. And that should be good, except for we still have an error. Now, the error doesn't come from any typos. We do need to declare a type. And notice the error now. It says considering specifying arguments and all that stuff, T, and if you Google for that or search in some other ways, it might become a bit troublesome. But just remember, on any input element, if you get some kind of error, first, check if you have that T, the type. If you have that type specified, usually that fixes most of these quick errors and other arrangements. So we have MudGrid, and let's do XS like that. And we seem to have another little problem, just something very simple at this point. And the simple problem is probably right here. Let's see. We have accept two terms, not accept terms, which in hindsight, accept terms perhaps would have been a better naming for the property, but really it doesn't matter. That's not what we are doing here. At this point, we have this ready, that ready, so we can actually try to create a button. And then we can try and see how the validation works and how all the errors work as well. For the button, we don't just want to have a simple button. We also want some kind of a loading mechanism. Now, you can do something fancier. Of course, we're probably not going to add really something too much. Although maybe later we'll slightly improve this just to make it a bit more fun. But let's do it like this for now. And let's do something basic. First, we need to see when it's loading. So if a form is loading, something is happening, it passes a validation. You won't have a loading anything really during the validation. That's so important to not overcrowd the actual validation part. But let's just do right here a little Boolean saying is, let's see, Boolean we first need is loading, let's say. Is loading, is submitting, probably is loading is a bit better. That's preference thing for you to decide. But let's move on and let's create a button. It will be kind of complicated, this one. We have mud button, first of all. And of course, we need to put it in an item, because everything is an item. When you have a grid, let's see, where's the item? Mud. Oh, since there's no proper suggestion, let's do it like this. Mud item, like that. Let's do that. No, that's too complicated. Let's just take this. Again, some of these suggestions, they do end up complicated sometimes. We don't need all that fancy stuff and all these different things. What we do, however, need is a little method. Let's say async task, submit async. Let's take this and take out like that. Okay, so submit async will be on click. On click is not like this, right? Not this one. On click is a basically a native component event. So let's do it like this. And also right away, let's just add disabled when it's loading. It's very important to add disabled when loading. Showing some kind of a loading interface. If you skip that, it's not going to be the best user experience. Now, if you don't disable a button, you might get some weird errors registered to users. If you perhaps allow the same email to be registered, that's not very likely scenario, but you can get duplicate records. So it's very important to disable. Of course, duplicate records should be handled on the backend, but in cheaper projects, you may not be able to do that, may not have time to do that. But this is a quick way to prevent all those little problems. So let's take this suggestion just so it's a bit quicker. It's not going to be mud spinner because that doesn't exist. That's not a thing. And the span we can leave, we can do register. So normal button, when you're entering stuff into the form, you will see button with text register, perfectly fine. Now, if it is loading, we want not just text, perhaps let's do a little icon and let's see if we can actually make it in line. Probably not going to be looking very great, but we have mud progress. So we have mud progress circular and mud progress linear. Probably quite self-explanatory. In this case, we can't really do any sort of real progress, so we're just doing indeterminate, mud circular, a little circle spinning, and also MudBlazor does provide their own icons. There's plenty of icons to choose from. That can be very useful when you're doing sort of these things, and perhaps if you're doing the navigation, if you watch the previous videos, we use some icons on navigation. Again, makes your life a lot easier. You don't need to search for another library and find them from there. So let's do like this. We have a little class applied. Not too sure if we need a class here. Let's remove. Size is small, good enough. And what we'll try to do, let's just do it like this. We have register, we have loading. And in fact, what we could do, just to simplify this a bit, this should work perfectly fine, and get rid of that and put that here like that. So it's going to be register, and then to the right side, hopefully it will work. We'll have a little thing spinning when it is actually loading. Now then, let's create a little handling for submitting. And this will again be the sort of main difference in some ways on how the validation works, which again, can be a bit troublesome or not, depending on how you view all these things compared to regular form. The validation is sort of what makes the difference here. But let's just do a very basic one. And since we have a reference here, we will try and validate it. So await form validate. Now, it will either validate or not, and then manually we are checking for whether the form is validated or not. Let's see, form is valid. Something to note here as well. We also have is touched, is valid changed, so you can kind of get into these more complex arrangements. But if you do get into very complex validation, custom validation, it might be useful to just go with custom form. Not using MudForm, but just using form. But then you can use any of the MudBlazor components inside. Again, it is your own sort of choice, a matter of preference in a way, and also a question of complexity. If it's too complicated, if it's too customized, maybe going with a simple form is a good idea. But let's just do a simple, very simple return here. And at this point, we can probably do some sort of a test. In fact, let's not do anything more. Let's try to put some breakpoints here, and let's try to actually jump into that and validate it. Now, as we're in the form, we can try and register or submit the form in a on-click kind of a way. You know, there's a difference. We are not using a valid submit and submit on validation or something like that, like you would use in a regular form. We are just using the button click, so not an input, not a submit type of the input button, but a button type of button. So let's try it. We get to the form validate, we can move along. Let's see, it's try to validate, and the validation is false. Now let's jump back into the whole thing. And as you can see, the errors are being perfectly nicely displayed. One thing you may notice, first of all, the design is different. You can certainly do an outline on the select. All the components can have all the same variants, essentially. The checkbox is a bit different, but all the input selects and things like that, they can be outlined, or they can be text or something else. In this case, a completely different design. But another thing is, we do have a default value here, so we don't start from empty. That's why there is no error, because the only error that we have is required. Now, if say we enter a low name, right away, just on the click, it removes the error, and we can try to revalidate, and it's still not going to be valid because we're missing all the other stuff. But essentially now this part works perfectly fine. We have that, and this part also works perfectly fine, even though it's showing an error like that. We do not have that value, so it should be showing the error. Now let's finish up with the little method that we have, and then we can wrap it up with actual testing of the form, that everything is valid, and checking how it is valid. For the form itself, we're just missing a couple of bits. We have the invalid part, like that, but we do need the valid. And also something not to forget, when the loading starts, right? We need to start the loading, and we also must finish the loading. Always do it after your try and catch statements, after everything, because if you have lots of logic going on, perhaps several try and catch statements, but several ways to fail, several if statements in there, just do it at the end of this method, or somewhere very clear that it actually stops loading, because in some circumstances you might have users, the whole application, the whole thing, the process failing for the user, but you won't know where it's failing and why it's failing. It just keeps on loading. Maybe it's perfectly fine, it just catches some validation, some fancier, bigger validation part in some if statement and it fails, and you'll never know it. It will be very difficult to debug. So always make sure with loading that you set true in the right place, but also more importantly, setting false in a correct place. Let's just do true false. We won't use any try and catch. We won't simulate too much. For this video, we will just do a little simulation here. We won't actually insert the data. In the later videos, we'll kind of connect everything together, the display part and this part, and we will try some other things out as well. So let's see. Let's do another Boolean here. And let's stop debugging. There's no need for that. And let's call this one registration success, like that. And with this, we can display a few different outcomes. Just so we see the load button, let's add a little delay there, because it's going to be instant, because we don't really have any sort of real logic. So let's do that. But another thing that's quite important, whether you do this or failed registration, not failed form validation, but failed registration for other reason, or unsuccessful one, if you don't redirect. If you redirect somewhere, then it doesn't matter. But if you're allowing another user to register, or more importantly, if it's failed in some way that you need to reset everything, you can reset the form. Let's see, where is my user? Registered user right here. Let's put it there. So user, first of all, we said, but if you want to actually reset the form properly, you'll need to do a wait form reset. So it's kind of a manual handling here, but that's how it is in this arrangement. And again, that's something to kind of compare as well. So now in the code, let's check the validation again. Let's just push register. Let's see. Let's get rid of these breakpoints so we can see it visually properly. Let's do again. And one thing you will notice right now, the validation is failing, so we don't get the loader thing, which can be a good thing or not, depending on how long the validation goes, but really it's not going to do anything. It's not going to actually interact with your logic unless you have something before the validation or during the validation, but you probably won't because it's validation. So let's do tester, something simple, because we are testing this out. So let's do simple basic stuff. Everything is valid. Now let's see if it's loading. And we have a little loading icon, loading circle. One thing again you might notice, the button is just simple text. You can again change the variant for the button. You can change the variant for this whole arrangement. Anything you want, you can change. But the form is now reset and you have a full form going for you. So that's all great and good, but as you notice, we kind of use these default things. There is no on valid submit or anything like that. Now, it may be useful sometimes if you want to customize, but in general, it usually is simpler to just use form, right? A simple form from HTML, and then use all the components, and you can put it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. If it's MudForm or a simple form, you can do the same MudGrid arrangement, the same Mud items, the same text fields. So you can use everything from Blazor, just not the form. If you like to control it this way, perfectly fine. But it probably adds a bit of code, and it is quite unnecessary in general, although to some extent the errors might work a bit better, especially on some variations and some input components. Now, in the next video, we'll take a look at customization of all these components, not just changing a variant, but changing the Mud theme and perhaps customizing some of these buttons as they are, which can get a bit more tricky. The code is available on Patreon. If you're interested in new .NET 10 stuff, take a look at some other videos, some recent videos we have. There is a video about .NET 10 minimal APIs now available with validation, so you can learn about validation and just in general minimal APIs in .NET 10, and the source code is available on Patreon, as well as some free courses for certain subscription tiers. And with that said, we will conclude this video.